Did you see that? It's waiting for us at the end of the hall. Did you hear that?
The shadows, they moved.
I swear I saw it move.
The sound of scratching claws. I stand in the abandoned hallway, hearing nothing but the muffled scraping from behind the walls. It doesn't stop. I think it's just rats, but it's too rhythmic, too deliberate. My flashlight flickers once, then dies. The oppressive silence forces me to listen harder, but there's something else now. A whisper, too low to catch, but unmistakable. The walls seem to close in. I step backward, heart racing. I was supposed to be investigating a forgotten office building, old files buried away, nothing more. But this place feels alive, like it's waiting for something. Or someone. The whisper comes again, a hiss of my name. My legs freeze. The air thickens with an unseen presence. I should have turned back, but it's too late. The ground beneath my feet shifts. The walls groan. And the whisper grows louder. I was told the building had been abandoned for years, left to rot with the ghosts of corporate ambition. They said I was just supposed to clear out the old files and inventory. Standard procedure, nothing out of the ordinary. But from the moment I walked through the doors, I knew it wasn't right. The air was thick with dust, heavy and stale, like it hadn't been touched in decades. My footsteps echoed on the cracked linoleum floor, each one more unnerving than the last. The hallway stretched out before me, dimly lit by flickering overhead lights that buzzed incessantly, like a constant reminder of the decay surrounding me. A heavy silence pressed down on the building, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're being watched, like the very walls are holding their breath, waiting for something. I checked the time. 10:30 a.m. The morning had started like any other, but here, in this hollow building, the hours seemed to slow, dragging with each minute that passed. A stack of papers sat on a dusty desk in the corner, untouched for years, the words on the front page now faded. I walked past it, unease settling in my chest. The rest of the floor looked no different. Old desks, broken chairs, and abandoned cubicles, all standing like silent witnesses to some forgotten past. I made my way to the first file cabinet. The clanking of the metal against my hands seemed too loud in the silence. The files were old, yellowing with age, the labels barely legible. Each folder was a relic, an artifact, a piece of the past no one had bothered to remember. I sifted through them, one by one. Employee reports. Performance evaluations. Nothing noteworthy. Until I came across a folder that was not like the others. It was thicker than the rest, with no label. Just a heavy, nondescript manila cover. The edges were worn, creased, and frayed, as if it had been opened many times and shoved back into the drawer without care. My fingers hesitated over it. Something about it felt different. My stomach twisted. Against my better judgment, I pulled it out. As I opened it, I felt the room grow colder. The air grew heavy, thick with an unexplainable tension. The contents of the file were not what I expected. There were no typical reports or forms. Instead, there were photographs. Grainy, black and white images, faded to near illegibility. People I didn't recognize, standing in front of a building that looked like this one. A group of solemn faces, eyes hollow, gazing into the camera as if they were waiting for something. I could feel the weight of their gazes even now, like they were staring right at me from the yellowed paper. I flipped the pages, each one filled with more pictures. Strange, unsettling pictures. Symbols. Rituals. A dark figure standing in the background of one photo, barely visible but unmistakable in its presence. A man in the front row, his face twisted in an expression of pain, his eyes wide with terror. It wasn't just a photograph, it was a memory frozen in time, a moment captured in dread. But it was the last page that caught my attention. A handwritten note, scrawled hastily across the bottom of the page. The ink was smeared, like it had been written in a hurry, or perhaps under duress. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the words. Don't open the rest. Leave now. I froze. The voice in my head screamed at me to put the file back, to leave the building, to get out. But I didn't. Instead, I felt the pull, something deeper than curiosity. It was as if the building itself was calling to me, urging me to dig further, to uncover what had been buried here for so long. I couldn't explain it, but I felt compelled to keep going. I looked around the room, suddenly aware of the oppressive silence pressing in on me. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. There were no windows, just dark hallways stretching off into the unknown. A faint sound echoed from somewhere deep within the building. It was almost imperceptible, like a whisper carried on the air. I leaned in closer, straining to hear. The whisper came again, louder this time, clearer. Leave. You shouldn't be here. My blood ran cold. My breath hitched in my throat. The voice wasn't from the file. It wasn't from anyone in the building. It felt inside me, as though the walls were speaking, breathing, alive with something I couldn't understand. Something old. I slammed the file shut, my hands trembling. My pulse hammered in my ears. What the hell was happening? I looked around the room, but everything seemed still unchanged. No one was here. I was alone. Yet the feeling of being watched only grew stronger, creeping up my spine, crawling under my skin. I should have left. I knew it deep down. I should have turned around and walked out that door, called for help, left this place to rot like it was meant to. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the whisper. Maybe it was the need to understand, to know what had happened here. What was buried here? I stood up, backing away from the desk. My eyes kept darting back to the file, still sitting on the edge of the table. I turned toward the door, but before I could take a step, something shifted in the air. Something wrong. The room felt colder, the silence more suffocating. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then the lights flickered again. I couldn't get the image of the photograph out of my head. The twisted face, the man in the crowd, his eyes wide with fear. It haunted me as I made my way through the rest of the building. The air felt heavier now, oppressive in a way that I couldn't explain. The whispers had stopped, but the feeling of being watched hadn't. Every step I took echoed too loudly in the silence, the hum of the flickering lights a constant reminder of how alone I was. Alone except for them. I pushed the file deep into my bag, trying to shove aside the unease gnawing at me. Focus. Just finish the job. Get out. But something inside me knew that leaving wasn't as simple as walking out the door. Not anymore. I wandered deeper into the building, following the maze of empty hallways that seemed to stretch on forever. The doors were all locked, or just wrong. When I touched the handles, they gave no resistance, yet the moment I tried to push them open, they felt as if something heavy was pressing against them from the other side. I tried a few more, each with the same strange response, until I found one that opened with an eerie creak. It led to an old conference room, the windows covered by heavy drapes that had long since fallen into tatters. The room was empty, save for a long table at the center, covered with dust and old stains. A few chairs were knocked over, and a stack of papers sat at the far end, their edges curled and yellowed. I stepped inside cautiously, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I immediately felt like I was intruding, like this room, this space, had been untouched for so long, yet there was something here, something waiting. I crossed the room quickly, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that I wasn't alone. As I reached the table, something caught my eye, a piece of paper sticking out from beneath the others. I bent down to retrieve it, my fingers brushing against the fragile sheet. The words written on it were in a hurried, almost frantic scrawl. The ink was smeared, as though the writer had been too desperate to care about legibility. They are watching. They are everywhere. You will never escape. The building. It's a trap. The past never leaves. It lingers. It calls. I read the words over and over, a cold sweat creeping down my spine. This wasn't just some old office building. This wasn't just a forgotten archive of corporate history. This place was alive, alive with something ancient and hungry. The voices, the shadows, the cold. It was all connected. The file in my bag, the photographs, the warnings. It wasn't just random. I was meant to be here. But why? I shoved the paper back onto the table, my heart racing as I turned to leave. And that's when I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a moment I thought I had imagined it. The figure was barely visible in the dim light, standing just outside the room, obscured by the shadows. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its body outlined in the darkness. But it wasn't the height that made my blood run cold. It was the absence of features, the empty space where a face should have been, where a body should have been. It was like it wasn't fully there, like it was made of shadows, of mist. I didn't move. I couldn't. It stood perfectly still, watching me, the silence between us stretching unbearably long. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. I stumbled backward, crashing into the table. My hand shot out, grabbing the edge to steady myself. My breathing was shallow, panicked. There was no way I had imagined that. It couldn't have been. I looked around the room in frantic desperation, but it was empty. Silent. Just the dust, the papers, and the oppressive air. I should have left. I knew it deep down. But I couldn't. Not yet. I backed out of the room slowly, my pulse hammering in my chest. I had to find out what was going on. I had to understand what I had walked into. But every step I took, the feeling of dread grew heavier, the air colder. The building wasn't just a shell of a forgotten past. It was a tomb. And I was trapped inside. I wandered the halls for what felt like hours, but it was impossible to tell how much time had passed. The fluorescent lights flickered on and off, the buzzing loud in the silence. The shadows twisted in unnatural ways, shifting when I wasn't looking. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was following me. At every turn, I half expected to see the figure again, standing just behind me, watching with those empty eyes. I found a stairwell, old and rusted, leading down to what appeared to be the lower levels. The basement, maybe. Something deep inside me screamed at me to turn back, to leave before I dug too deep. But the pull, the compulsion to understand, was stronger. I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know what was happening here. I descended into the darkness, the smell of mildew growing stronger as I moved lower. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. I could hear my footsteps echoing off the walls, and yet there was something else. A sound, faint but unmistakable. It was a whisper, barely audible, but it was there. Leave now. Don't go any further. I stopped dead in my tracks. The voice wasn't coming from anywhere I could pinpoint. It wasn't coming from a speaker or a radio. It was inside my mind, echoing through the corridors of my thoughts. I felt the chill run through me, spreading from the tips of my fingers to the pit of my stomach. But then, a door at the end of the hall creaked open. A sliver of dim light spilled into the hallway. Without thinking, I moved toward it, my steps slow, cautious. The door was ajar, just enough to allow the faintest sliver of light to break through the darkness. My hand trembled as I reached out and pushed it open. The room inside was smaller than I had expected. Dimly lit, with nothing more than a few old chairs and a desk. But it was the desk that caught my attention. It was covered in papers, the same kind of yellowed, brittle files I had seen upstairs. And on top of the desk, there was a large black book. It looked old, its leather cover cracked and worn with age. The title was stamped in faded gold letters. The Order of Silence. My heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was what I had been searching for. I reached for the book, my fingers brushing the cover. The moment I touched it, the temperature in the room dropped, the air growing unbearably cold. I opened the book, my breath fogging in the sudden chill. And then the whispers came again. Only now they weren't whispers. They were voices, louder, clearer, all around me, speaking at once. Terrifying. Real. You should have left. It's too late. Before I could react, the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. The air grew thicker, suffocating. The walls felt like they were closing in. It's too late, the voices repeated. I dropped the book, and as it hit the floor, the lights went out. The building was plunged into darkness. The darkness was thick, suffocating. The cold wrapped itself around me like a vice, and for a moment I thought I couldn't breathe. My heart thundered in my chest, the sound drowning out everything else. The building groaned as if it was alive, the walls shifting with a life of their own. The whispers were louder now, closer. Too close. It's too late. You should have never come. I staggered backward, my hands outstretched, desperately trying to find anything in the black void that surrounded me. The cold was cutting through my skin, seeping into my bones, paralyzing me. I couldn't move. I couldn't see. I could only hear them. The voices, the murmurs, the countless whispers that had followed me since I'd stepped into this forsaken building. And then, suddenly, the lights flickered back on, blinding me with their harsh, sterile glow. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The room was unchanged, the black book still lying open on the floor. But there was something else, something that shouldn't have been there. The figure. It was standing in the doorway. The same figure from before, the one with no face, no features. Just a presence, an absence, something that defied everything I knew. Its form was like smoke, like shadow, but more than that. It was wrong. It wasn't real. But it was there, and that was enough to paralyze me. Its head turned toward me, slow and deliberate, like it was sizing me up. The silence in the room stretched, suffocating, until finally, it spoke. You shouldn't have come. The voice was low, guttural, like a rasping breath caught in the throat. It sounded like the walls themselves were speaking. I took a step back, but my legs felt like stone. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My mind was consumed by the thing in front of me, by the oppressive weight of its gaze, its presence. It was closing in, no longer standing still in the doorway. It was coming toward me, step by step, unstoppable. I wanted to scream, to run, but no sound came. My throat was dry, my limbs frozen in place. There was no escaping it now. You opened the door, it said, its voice a whisper now, a whisper that cut through the silence and scraped along the edges of my sanity. And now you will understand. It reached out, and the air around me shifted. The walls seemed to pulse, to breathe, as if the building itself had become an extension of this thing, this entity. The floor beneath my feet groaned and buckled, the building alive with a terrible, unstoppable force. The room seemed to twist, the walls bending inwards as the shadows deepened and stretched across the floor. I wanted to close my eyes, to shut it out, but I couldn't. The sight of it was too much, too overwhelming. And the whispers, they were everywhere, rising louder and louder. You're here because you're meant to be, it continued, its voice now echoing through my mind, rattling my thoughts. We've been waiting. You think you're different. You think you're safe. But you're just another link in the chain. Another soul. Another vessel. The room shifted again, the light distorting around me. It felt like time was folding in on itself. The floor felt unstable, and I could hear the walls, the floors, groaning with age and desperation. The figure moved closer, its presence like a heavy weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. I tried to speak, to ask what it wanted, but the words wouldn't come. My breath was shallow, my vision beginning to blur. My body was trembling uncontrollably, like a leaf in the wind. And then it spoke again, but this time, the words were not for me. It turned its head toward the shadows, where the whispers were coming from, where the voices seemed to wait, and it spoke its words a chant, a low, guttural mutter that resonated deep within my chest. No one escapes. No one survives. The door has been opened. The past is waking. And then the shadows moved. Slowly at first, like a ripple across the air. But then they rushed forward, engulfing the room in darkness. The air grew impossibly cold, the temperature dropping until I could see my breath clouding in front of me. The darkness was alive. It moved like a living thing, wrapping itself around me, tightening its grip. I could feel it, the presence, pressing in from every angle. The walls were closing in, the air thick with a cold that made my skin feel like it was cracking open. The figure had disappeared, swallowed by the shadows, but its presence remained. Its voice echoed in my mind, louder now, its words turning into a terrible truth that I couldn't escape. "You are the last," it whispered, its voice now directly inside my head. "The last to find the truth. The last to remember." I stumbled backward, my legs giving way beneath me. I fell to the floor, my hands scrambling against the cold, slick surface, my heart racing with fear. The room was spinning. The shadows were everywhere. The whispers were growing louder, a cacophony of voices all blending into one overwhelming sound. You can't escape. No one escapes. And then it hit me. The building, the whispers, the figure. It wasn't just a haunting. It was something far worse. A trap. A curse. The building had been waiting for me. It had drawn me in piece by piece. The file. The book. The whispers. It had all been designed to break me, to lure me into the depths of this place, where there was no way out. The truth had been buried here long ago, and it had never let go. It was alive. It had always been alive. The walls began to pulse, to throb with an energy I couldn't understand. The temperature plummeted, and I felt myself being pulled toward something. Toward the center of the room, toward the shadows that seemed to open up like a mouth, like an abyss waiting to swallow me whole. I reached out, my hands trembling, grasping for something. Anything to hold on to. But there was nothing. Just the blackness. Just the voices. Just the presence. I heard it then. A final whisper. Clear. Distinct. You were never meant to leave. And that was it. The darkness consumed me. The room, the building, the very air. I was swallowed whole. I awoke, though I was unsure I'd ever truly been unconscious. The cold was unbearable, biting at my skin, and the darkness. It was no longer a mere absence of light, but a thick, palpable thing. I could feel it pressing down on me, squeezing my chest, my lungs. I tried to breathe, but my body didn't respond. My mouth was dry, my tongue thick in my mouth, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make a sound. The air around me felt unnatural, heavy, as if the entire world had forgotten how to move. The room, if it could even be called a room anymore, was unchanged. The walls were cracked, but now they seemed to pulse, as if something inside them was trying to break free. The shadows, once cornered and limited by the flickering light, now stretched and swelled with a terrible life of their own. They seemed to be everywhere. There was no escape. The thing, the figure, the presence, was still here, lurking in the corners of my mind. I tried to push myself up from the floor, but my limbs felt foreign, stiff, uncooperative. My hand brushed against something cold and metallic. I looked down and saw the black book lying next to me, open to the pages that had caused this nightmare to begin with. The same pages, the same ink, the same words. But now they felt different. They felt alive. The whispers came again. Not in my ears, but in my head, faint, barely discernible at first, then growing louder, clearer. They were calling to me, beckoning me to read the words again, to understand, to accept. I couldn't help myself. My fingers trembled as they reached for the book, as though the very air around me was manipulating my movements, guiding my hands to turn the pages. I didn't want to read it. I didn't want to know. But the compulsion was too strong, too undeniable. I was already too far gone. The pages flipped slowly, as though resisting, reluctant to reveal their secrets. The ink on the paper seemed to crawl, the words shifting before my eyes, rearranging themselves into a language I couldn't understand. But even so, I knew what they meant. I felt it. They were promises. They were a curse. A binding that could not be undone. It was a fate that had been set long before my arrival. The building had chosen me. And the worst part, I had known it all along. The signs were there. The whispers. The photographs. The file. They had all been a warning, a desperate cry from those who had come before me. And now, like them, I was trapped, bound to the walls of this place. There would be no escape. I pushed the book away, but it didn't matter. The whispers didn't stop. The building had already claimed me. My eyes snapped to the window, and for the first time I realized it was still night. The outside world felt so distant, so unreachable. There was no longer any sense of time. The hours had become meaningless in this place. I was isolated, as if the world outside had forgotten I existed. My phone still didn't work. The light from the single flickering bulb above seemed to be swallowed by the shadows, casting long, unnatural stretches of darkness across the room. It was then that I noticed something, or rather someone, moving in the shadows. I froze. My heart raced, pounding so loudly in my chest that it almost drowned out the whispers. A figure, thin and fragile, crept through the darkness toward me. It wasn't the entity, not the one I had seen before. This one was smaller, more human. The shape was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. The figure stopped just before me, its face hidden in shadow, but I could see its eyes, wide, wild, full of fear. There was a quiet desperation in the way it stood, as if it had been trapped here for years, perhaps longer. And then it spoke. "You're still here." The voice was weak, trembling, barely a whisper, but it shattered the silence of the room like a crash of glass. I flinched, but I couldn't look away. The voice sounded so familiar. Too familiar. It took me a moment to place it. "You shouldn't have stayed," the figure whispered, its hands shaking. "It never ends. It never will." I could feel the fear rolling off it, the same fear that had gripped me since I had stepped into this cursed building. But there was something else, something deeper. A kind of hopeless resignation in the way the figure spoke. A knowledge of what awaited us, what we had become. I didn't speak. What was there left to say? The figure moved closer, its breath shallow, its body trembling. Its hands reached out toward me, but they weren't for comfort. They were for warning. A silent plea. It gripped my arm with a strength that felt unnatural, its fingers digging into my flesh like claws. "You have to understand," it gasped. "It knows. It's always known. It won't stop until you're one of them." The words hit me like a punch. I struggled to pull away, but the figure's grip only tightened. The darkness pressed in closer, the air thickening around us. I looked into the figure's eyes, empty, hollow, and saw the same fear I had felt moments before, the same terror, the same hopelessness. There was no escape. There was no way out. Suddenly, the figure's grip loosened, and it collapsed onto the floor, a soft gasp escaping its lips. It was gone, vanishing into the shadows as quickly as it had appeared. I was left standing alone, the room still and silent once more, the shadows now almost suffocating. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I should have left. I should have listened. But it was too late. It had always been too late. I glanced back at the book, still open on the floor. The whispers hadn't stopped. If anything, they had only grown louder, more insistent. They were calling me again, beckoning me to join them, to accept what I had become, to be one with the darkness. The building groaned, its walls creaking as though it was alive. And maybe, in a way, it was. I could feel it, sinking into me, wrapping itself around me like a suffocating blanket. It had me now, just like it had them. I turned away, my feet moving on their own, pulling me toward the hallway. I didn't know where I was going, but it didn't matter. There was nowhere to go. The building had already claimed me. There was no way out. But I didn't need to see the outside world anymore. I didn't need to feel the sun on my skin. I was trapped here forever. One of them. Just another lost soul in the halls of the abandoned building, swallowed by the whispers, swallowed by the darkness. And as I walked, I realized something that chilled me to my very core. The whispers had stopped, but the building, it was still breathing. And it had me now.